So we're going to talk today about a man who Britain, and dare I say the world, have much to thank for. He has a pub named after him in Soho. I'm talking, of course, about a man named John Snow, who discovered that diseases like cholera and typhoid were actually waterborne, meaning you drink it or bathe in it. And this might seem obvious to us today, but it certainly wouldn't have been in the past, thanks to a theory called the miasma theory. Miasma was the belief that bad smells, the thick odour in the air that would have come from everything from human to horse manure, the dead carcasses all over the place, that the very smell, the very essence in the air was what was making you sick. But John Snow discovered otherwise. And to really tell his story, what I'm going to do is jump forward a few years to discuss something that happened because he was ignored. So he made his discovery in 1854, but in 1858 we had a horrific event called the Great Stink. This was basically an event where the River Thames turned into a cesspit itself. It became unbearable to the point where even the dockers couldn't work on the Thames without throwing up. It was so bad that even Parliament had to move. And as we know, when Parliament have to move, something's finally about to get done. Now, this was because basically our human waste, everything we ate, everything bad, the disposal of food, everything went into the Thames. And the sewage was pumped into the very same place that our drinking water came from. Now, today, this seems crazy to us, but in the past, it wouldn't have been that crazy to think that it was because of miasma. That's not really something we can blame people for. If you was working in anatomy or the sciences in the 1800s, it would have been very believable that miasma was the issue, which is why John Snow was ignored for so long. Now, so bad was the River Thames that there are still spots to this day you can go to visit, which will mention this, such as the preserved site under Tower Bridge called Dead Man's Hole, which is tiled, which was a mortuary, and by the old mortuary in Rotherhithe, you will see spots that were designated just to drag out the abundance of human dead bodies that would pile up into certain regions because of the tide. Now, this really tells us just how bad it was, because today if there's a dead body in the Thames, everyone knows about it, there'll be helicopters everywhere, it'll be a big thing. But in the past, this was a very common occurrence. If people weren't batting an eyelid to dead bodies, just imagine what else was in there. There was two major water companies along the south bank of the River Thames. There was the Southwark and Vauxhall Water Company, which was between Southwark Bridge and London Bridge, which is right down the river. And then there was the Lambeth Water Company, which was somewhere around there, just the other side of that bridge there. Now, that one there was taking in water that was safe to drink. But why was this? What was wrong with the other one? Well, the Southwark and Vauxhall Water Company just so happened to be taking its water downstream where there was sewage being pumped in. Everything that they were doing was basically killing people as opposed to saving them. Many of the discoveries made by John Snow led on to why we have the sewage system and all else. And there were other names that were trying to back up John Snow in the end. Most people poo-pooed him, ignored him, but in the end they were saying that if we do not sort out the sewage system and we did not develop the metropolitan sewage system and everything we know today, then things would get so bad that the economy would never have grown. In fact, it would have been just another form of plague, really. Because cholera, though it wasn't as bad as the Black Death, it was awful and it would take your life very, very quickly. So if people had listened to John Snow and got to work at the right time, there never would have been a Great Stink. So before Mr. Snow's work on anaesthesia and discovering waterborne diseases, he was originally born in York. And here is a symbolic memorial to when he was a young man living in York. You can see behind me these stunning buildings as a reminder of what York is. A truly beautiful place. I thoroughly enjoy myself in places like York. So if you come forward for me without tripping over, you'll see his blue plaque and the symbolic handle to the pump. If I had my way, these would actually be functioning pumps. So they're not just symbolic, but practical and useful. And I think it would add even more character to little features like this. Before we close up, just turn around so you can get an insight as to where John grew up. Beautiful. Lovely and quaint this time of morning. So here we are on Broadwick Street in Soho. This was once called Broad Street, which is why nearby was the Broad Street pump. This is the John Snow pub, which has been around since the 1870s. So it was established after his lifetime. It was called the Newcastle upon Tyne. And in the 1950s, around 1955, it was renamed the John Snow to commemorate his accomplishments, his discoveries. So come with me and let's have a closer look. It looks absolutely magnificent in this light at this time of day. I needn't point out the lovely woodwork, the hanging baskets. I think it really does strike a beautiful image. But many people pass this without knowing what it is. So, come over here for me, and you'll see it says here, the red granite curbstone marks the site of the historic Broad Street pump. Obviously this is Broadwick Street now. Associated with Dr. John Snow's discovery in 1854 that cholera is conveyed by water, which is right here. So that's where the pump actually stood. So they've not really done a bad job, because this has been replaced symbolically, which is quite a charming feature considering how modernistic much of London is becoming. And I find it takes saving mankind for you to get your name put in the history books these days. We have far too many Great Britons. I mean, when I talk to people about people like Isambard Kingdom Brunel, they don't really know who he is, and John Snow, they don't know who they are. So it's nice to see little things like this to commemorate them. So John Snow had previously discovered that cholera was waterborne, but people hadn't believed him. So when a major cholera outbreak took place in Soho, he knew he had to get down here to try and find some evidence. You see, he was taught in the conventional means at the time, so all of his skills as a doctor, or when he was learning to be a doctor, were pretty useless at fighting cholera, because he was doing things to try and cure them as if they had inhaled it. So he noticed that all of his schooling basically amounted to nothing. He knew he had to pioneer a new idea, and many of his peers or superiors in the game were ignoring him. So he comes down to Soho to find a catalyst. What he did was he started asking around to see who was doing what. The victims of cholera all had something in common, and he had a feeling he knew what it was. And lo and behold, it was that most of them, or pretty much all of them, had been drinking from this pump here. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things as to how he discovered this in just a moment, but what I will say is, when he finally convinced the people that ran the water boards at the time that it was coming from this pump, they took his word for it and they took the handle off. which is off today, as you can see, right? Once they did that, within days, the outbreak stopped. But they still didn't want to believe him because it would have been too embarrassing and there would have been too much work around it to put it right. So a short while after, they put the pump back on, or the handle to the pump back on, much to John's dismay, before they managed to get down and fix it. It wasn't until later that people really looked into this and discovered that the cesspits that they thought were running into a separate place were in fact seeping through the soil and joining up with the badly made system beneath this pump. So it must have really broke his heart, because he died the same year as the Great Stink, which means he saw his idea work and then he saw it ignored, and he wouldn't live to see the world accept and appreciate what he had been saying this whole time. But to those of us that love our alcohol, there's one more reason as to how he came to this conclusion, and that's just around the corner. Let's go and have a look. This is Hopkins Street, and if we was to walk to the end there, we'd be back on Broadrick Street. So this basically runs off the back of Broadrick Street. Now, there were two major contributing factors towards his discovery. Obviously, John Snow was asking people that lived here and so on how they were becoming sick or how they weren't becoming sick, but there was a workhouse nearby and no one in that workhouse was becoming ill. He asked the owners of the workhouse how this is taking place, and they said they had their own private source of water. They had a private pump. That's quite self-explanatory. But then he went into the brewers, which was somewhere around here, and they only drank beer. Now, I would not advise today, it's not good medical advice to tell someone to only drink beer to try and stay healthy, though Dan manages quite well. But I will say that if it wasn't for some of these conclusions, he wouldn't have been listened to, because the mass amounts of people in the workhouse and the brewers were part of the evidence that he needed to have that pump shut down. So, ladies and gents, if anyone ever has a go at you for drinking too much or drinking, just say, well, if it wasn't for beer, no one would have believed him. So thank you very much for beer.